In Genesis 5, I'm going to talk about an interesting character, Enoch. Now, Enoch must have been a common name because we've seen his name before. Do you remember? Enoch's name was the son of Cain. And that Enoch was one who tried pretty hard to forget God. He had a whole city named after him. Well, this Enoch is different. And as we go through the generation of Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah, those are 10 names. Enoch is name number 7. Now, the Bible doesn't say much about Enoch, but there was actually a book which was called the Book of Enoch. And one of the things that the Bible says was quoted from this book. So you can do your own research about how they pick and choose the books of the Bible. But what I want to point out here is that Enoch shows up in this chapter. And his life is a little bit intriguing. As I read, Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah. He had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch was 365. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He was not? Interesting grammatical structure there, because we use the word to be without any kind of antecedent. And in that case, it makes for strange grammar. But I think it's meant to be that way, because when we see that he was not, it was probably one of the first real mysteries of his day, that a man would be walking around and then suddenly nobody knows where he is. And then somehow they knew that God took him. Well, we can look a little bit more about this in Hebrews 11, the famous what we call Hall of Faith. I find it interesting that Enoch is included. It says, by faith, Enoch was taken up, so that he should not see death. And he was not found because God took him up. For he obtained the witness that before his being taken up, he was pleasing to God. So we find out that Enoch was pleasing to God, and it was by faith. The very next verse says, by faith, without faith it's impossible to please God. So you need faith to please God. And in this case he says, faith is believing that God exists and that he rewards people who look for him. So with these verses here we learn quite a bit about Enoch. He was following God, he looked for God, he walked with God. And the final one I'll mention here is in the second to last book of Jude, which is a strange book, but it assumes a lot of understanding about these old stories. And Jude is talking about people who are coming into the love feasts, and I'll get to that someday, but the love feasts were basically feasts that Jesus instituted for people to love one another. And yet people were going in there, they were selfish, and they were just corrupting these beautiful feasts. And this was kind of a picture that Jude is pointing out of people in this world who God has ordained to create this beautiful world, which is kind of like what God intended through the line of Seth, the godly line. And yet there are people like Cain who just want to do their own thing, to forget God, and these people have corrupted the good things that God instituted. And it says in Jude, it says, woe to them, they have gone the way of Cain. Alright, and he mentions a couple other Bible characters that we haven't talked about yet, but basically these people have gone the way of Cain. And they're hidden reefs in your love feast. They feast with you without any concern. And they don't care, they care only for themselves. They are like clouds without water. They are like something being carried along by the wind. They are like autumn trees without any fruit. They are dead twice. They're like uprooted trees. They're just not destined to get the life that God intended. It says they're wild waves of the sea, casting up their own shame like foam, wandering stars for whom the black darkness is reserved forever. Interesting. Because when I look at Enoch in the book of Genesis, I see that Enoch was the very first indication to any of these people about an afterlife. Think about it. Up to this point, Adam was promised that he would become dust. And to dust he became. And by the time we get to Enoch, we can be pretty sure that Adam is dead. And there was no indication anywhere about where he went. However, Enoch just was taken by God, which means he had to be taken somewhere. To them, this was the first instance and the last instance for a long time about the afterlife. The next time we have someone taken, it's Elijah. And the whole Bible is very developed by that time. However, there are very few instances to any kind of life after death, except here at the very beginning. And I find it interesting that Enoch's circumstance is a good circumstance. However, it says in the book of Jude, which is quoting from the book of Enoch, which was rejected by most people, that Enoch preached that for those ungodly people, there's black darkness like wandering stars. Now, science has only just figured this out, but just as there are shining stars in the sky in all kinds of constellations, we've got wandering stars which are just like planets and are just floating out there. And there's millions. Some people say there are even more of them than there are actual stars. To me, that's fascinating, because Jude didn't know anything about that, probably. But at any rate, we've got this picture of the afterlife, which is a good picture in the book of Genesis. And we could build on that. Probably won't. I want to point out one more thing. God did two things for Enoch. One was that he took him up unto himself. Some people point this out as being like the rapture or something, but I think the point here is that God did for Enoch something beautiful to protect him from the wrath to come. He did something else. His son, Methuselah, was the oldest man who ever lived. He lived the longest life anyone had ever lived that we know of. And you have to do a little bit of math. But Methuselah was 969 years old. When he had his child, Lamech, he was 187. Lamech had his child, he was 182. You add those numbers together, you get 369. And then you add the age of Noah. When the flood came, you get 969. Well, that was the age that Methuselah was when he died. So either Methuselah was swept away by the flood, or much more likely, God waited for the whole lifetime of Methuselah before sending the flood. He waited the lifetime of the longest man that ever lived. And the flood is what we will go into from this. But I think it's just great that God gave Enoch a double portion of good things. And I think that is reserved for anyone who has faith, who seeks after God, who runs after God. God will give you not just one good thing. God will give you many good gifts. So I hope that you will be like the Enoch who was Adam's great-grandson, not Cain's Enoch. And so we have a little lesson here from Genesis 5.